thought of as being one of the top 13. However, for me as a researcher of the elite and the satanic hierarchy, the name pops up with surprising frequency. For instance, Stephen M. Freeman runs the Legal Affairs Department of the Civil Rights Division of the Anti-Defamation League, which is a daughter of the B'nai B'rith. The ADL is a dangerous organization controlled by the hierarchy. The Illuminati drug money to fund this organization. Another Freeman is Walter Freeman, who introduced the lobotomy into the U.S. with James W. Watts in 1936. The frontal lobotomy was a brutal method of mind control that has been permitted to be done to us, under the disguise that it is of benefit to humanity. Then there was Simon Freeman, an important intelligence officer. And the list goes on of people that are in key places with the Freeman name. But the most important position of all, which removes all doubt that the family is at the top, is that the late Grand Master of the Pre-Odyssean was Gaylord Freeman. Independent discoverers of the Pre-Odyssean. What is the Pre-Odyssean? Are we sure it exists? How does this relate to the hierarchy? The Pre-Odyssean Priory of Zion was unknown to the general public until 1982, when a book co-authored by Michael Bygent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln came out. The book was entitled Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and it offered historical proof that an organization called the Pre-Odyssean was powerful and had existed since the time of the early Crusades, 1099 A.D. In 1991, I came out a little more information on the Pre-Odyssean. The organization is so little known to even my readership, that we need to stop and really examine the Pre-Odyssean. In trying to figure out the mysteries surrounding this organization, Lincoln, Lee and Bygent's research led them to conclude that the holy bloodline that the Pre-Odyssean guarded was the bloodline of Jesus. This immediately made all their research anathema, condemned and disliked by the most of Christendom. I watched to see if Christians would refute the unbiblical parts of their research, but besides a couple of short articles, Christian Century, 9/1 to 880 seconds, Raiders of the Lost Grail, and Christianity Today, the 9th of March 82, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Holy Mackerel, in Christian periodicals. In addition to this was a small book in England, The Holy Grail Revealed, which simplistically claimed that the book was of no value because obviously it was erroneous. No one even pretended to try to refute the book, as far as I know, except for that English book which did pretend but didn't refute anything. The authors went on to write two more popular historical exposes concerning the Pre-Odyssean and Freemasonry, The Messianic Legacy and the Temple and the Lodge. Actually, to be fair to the Christians, if I hadn't already known from my research that much of the European information in Holy Blood, Holy Grail was correct, the wild religious speculation about Jesus in Part the 3rd of May have caused me to doubt the book too. The first Christian author to pick up on the Pre-Odyssean was J.R. Church, who wrote Guardians of the Grail, which built on Holy Blood, Holy Grail's research in a constructive way and put more pieces of the puzzle together. At last a book was out that challenged some of the false ideas of Holy Blood, Holy Grail without blindly throwing their excellent research. While the public at large had never heard of the Pre-Odyssean until Holy Blood, Holy Grail came out, the organization was written about in high-level military intelligence briefings years before the book. Some of the men in high-level intelligence have become concerned with the direction this nation is going. It is through such men that independent confirmation had leaked out too, even before the book. The information did get to some researchers. I came out with my Be Wise as Serpents book in 1991, which among other things covered the Pre-Odyssean, after I had concluded that the evidence verified its existence. I approached the issue from my own angle of research. In researching the Illuminati, it became clear: 1. That bloodlines were very important, 2. That the people in high-level Satanism believe they are descendants of the House of David, 3. The Illuminati's activities tied in many ways to the Pre-Odyssean. One startling tie-in was that the Freeman family was, according to an informant, one of the top 13 Illuminati families. The ex-Illuminati people I received information from were not familiar with Holy Blood, Holy Grail nor Guardians of the Grail. Even if they had, which they definitely hadn't, neither book mentions the Freeman family. It wasn't until the researchers of Holy Blood, Holy Grail wrote their sequel The Messianic Legacy that was published in 1987 that the name Freeman came out as the leader of the pre-Odyssean. In short, the way the research of mine and others simultaneously from different angles came up independently with similar conclusions using totally different sources confirms beyond a doubt that the pre-Odyssean exists, and that the Freeman family is indeed a very powerful family. I have never spelled out in detail the proofs about the pre-Odyssean and the Freeman family, and even now I am not going to. To me the basics are fact, and I don't want to get bogged down trying to prove the obvious when there is so much more to learn. There are stubborn people whose minds will not come along no matter how much proof and encouragement. They will just have to stay where they are. Describing the pre-Odyssean, the original start of the pre-Odyssean appears to have been the idea of a number of powerful bloodlines, and included various descendants of the Merovingians, including the House of Lorraine, the House of Guise, the Medicis, Sforzes, the Esters, the Gonzagas, and the St. Clairs Sinclairs. The Medicis are tied to the black nobility also. From the beginning the pre-Odyssean has been committed to Hermetic magic, a type of black magic that originated with the ancient Egyptians and portrayed in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. René d'Anjou, a descendant of the Merovingians, persuaded Cosimo de' Medici to establish in c. 1444 a non-church library at San Marco where Plato, Pythagorean works, and books on Hermetic magic were translated. Up until this time, the Catholic Church had control of all the libraries. It was from Cosimo de' Medici's library that the spark of Greek and Egyptian teachings set off what developed into the Renaissance, which was revival of humanism and the occult. It appears that during the Middle Ages, witchcraft and the mystery religions had seriously dissolved to the point that these modes of thought had to be relearned from the ancient writings. Interestingly, the Middle Ages when witchcraft and paganism were dissolving have been branded the Dark Ages by the establishment, and inaccurately painted as a time when learning went out. A magazine put out during WWIII by pre-Odyssean members was Vanka. The organization that took credit for the magazine was Alpha Galates. It carried articles on Atlantis, Theosophy, Celtic wisdom, and other esoteric things. The magazine also declared itself in favor of a united Europe. Robert Schumann, who was associated with the magazine Vanka, later became a leading architect of the EEC. An internal magazine for pre-Odyssean members is Circuit, the acronym for Chivalry of Catholic Rules and Institutions of the Independent and Traditionalist Union. A 1956 issue of Circuit promotes the use of a 13-sign zodiac rather than the traditional 12. The 1959 series of Circuit refer the reader to Vanka. The Circuit magazine, which claims to write its articles with hidden meaning, says this cryptically about the pre-Odyssean: "We are not strategists and we stand above all religious denominations, political perspectives and financial matters. We give to those who come to us moral aid in the indispensable manner of the Spirit." Another article says, "Except through new methods and new men, for politics are dead." The curious fact remains that men do not wish to recognize this. There exists only one question: economic organization. Dr. Otto von Habsburg, a descendant of the Merovingians, and a Knights of Malta, headed Pan-Europa, an organization that has been working toward a U.S. of Europe. Their logo was a Celtic cross in a circle. The first point in time that the pre-Odyssean can be pinpointed is when Jerusalem was captured by the Crusaders and an abbey of monks that Peter the Hermit had belonged to was established in a building called the Abbey of Notre Dame de Mont de Sion just outside of Jerusalem. This abbey had 3 in order that was called the Ordre de Sion. Over the centuries, the Ordre de Sion has developed into what we have today as the Prieur du Sion, Priory of Zion in English. Bear in mind that the Order of Sion was visible for several centuries but has been totally secret after the 13th century. It became semi-visible during the 1960s and 70s and became secret again in 1984. The group of monks that made up the original order were led by Ursus of the Merovingians. They were given a place at Orville in France until they apparently decided to move to the Holy Land. This order appears to have had the power behind the scenes to have been in the position to select who would sit on the throne at Jerusalem, and they initially selected their man Godefroy de Bouillon. The Ordre de Sion, Prieur du Sion, set up a military order called the Knights Templar. Louis VII of France became indebted to the Knights Templar, and in repayment of the help he had received he established some of the Ordre de Sion at the Priory of St. Samson, along with establishing 26 men, 2 groups of 13, at a small priory at the Mount of Sion, Orleans, France. In 1188, the Ordre de Sion let the Knights Templars apparently go their own way, which eventually was to trouble. The story of the Knights Templars is exceedingly interesting because it relates to the satanic international bankers of today. The Knights Templars became the first European-wide international bankers. How their story fits into everything would take too long to tell at this point. At that time period when the Knights Templars took off on their own, the Ordre de Sion became the Prieur du Sion, and also used the names Ormus and Rosecroix. The Prieur du Sion is intimately connected to the creation and guidance of the Rosicrucians and Freemasons. In the Be Wise as Serpents book, chapter 12, it talks about how the Prieur de Sion set up the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. In 1613, the House of Lorraine, part of the Prieur du Sion, joined with the House of Stuart. After that, the Prieur du Sion began to display more interest in Scotland. Scotland was one of the few countries WWIII the Knights Templars had thrived when the order was suppressed by the order of the Pope. Scotland also had several occult traditions operating. It was a hotbed of occult activity. Scotland and the Scottish people have played a very big role in the New World Order conspiracy for centuries. Meanwhile, when the Prieur de Sion went underground, they established their archives in some secret rooms beneath the chapel of St. Catherine, at the castle at Gisors, northern France in the Rue de Vienne. The archives were, according to reports, contained in 30 coffers. Secret tunnels connect the chapel with the local cemetery. The Merovingian descendants and the Prieur du Sion have guarded the sacred bloodline that Satan has built up. Their members are secretly scattered in key positions throughout society. Many of the descendants are unaware of their heritage. For instance, within the Sinclair family, only certain branches have kept up their generational occult heritage, and are aware of what is going on. Family trees subdivide over the centuries until the Merovingian family tree has become a forest. The houses of Habsburg Lorraine, whose titles are Dukes of Lorraine and Kings of Jerusalem, Plantard, Luxembourg, Montpezat, Montesquieu, among many others including the Freeman family, and hundreds of others. Be Wise as Serpents revealed for the first time, as far as I know, how all the heads, presidents, of the LDS and RLDS have been descendants of the Merovingian dynasty, and they and the Masons have both used the Merovingian symbol, the B. The House of David. In my research of high-level Satanists, it became clear that the bloodline that was key in their minds was the House of David, not Jesus Christ's lineage. I discovered that the House of David had set up a kingdom in southern France. I discovered this while rummaging through history books on the Middle Ages. I came upon a book, A Jewish Princedom in Feudal France, 768 to 900. This book was the key for me to realize that the Merovingian dynasty, which wove its bloodline into the royal bloods of Europe, was Jewish in origin. When I read Holy Blood, Holy Grail, it became apparent that the author's theory of Jesus's bloodline had clouded their realization that the key was that the Prieur du Sion was of the House of David and was in this sense Jewish, although most of the Prieur du Sion are most likely not attending synagogues. Indeed, the Grand Master of the Préodicéen Pierre Plantard de Saint Clair told him so much. To quote the pertinent paragraph from the Messianic Legacy, p. 296, at our meeting in April 1982, M. Plantard adopted an ambivalent attitude towards our book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. On the whole, he endorsed it and offered to correct, for the French edition, certain vague or unclear references. At the same time, he would neither confirm nor deny our thesis that the four Merovingian bloodline was descended from Jesus. There was no evidence either way, he said non-committally. It was all too far in the past, all too long ago. There were no reliable genealogies. Besides, Jesus had brothers. Nevertheless, he acknowledged the Merovingians to have been of Judaic descent, deriving from the royal line of David. The significance of this tremendous. It means that those people who have been saying that it is a Jewish conspiracy have been correct, even if some of these people saying these things may not be greatest characters. This also opens the door as to why the top leaders of the Illuminati have been willing to work with the Ashkenazi Jews. In Be Wise as Serpents, I show from Masonic sources that there is indeed a big connection at the top with the Jewish leadership and the House of David and Freemasonry. The goals of Freemasonry are intertwined with the goals of the Préodicéen. There is a big danger in labeling the conspiracy Jewish. When people label Jewish as bad, it confuses more than clarifies. The Jewish people are not the enemy. Next, although many of the satanic hierarchy claim to be from the House of David, they do not publicly proclaim themselves as Jews. In fact, they may publicly take a negative posture toward the Jews, such as Lady Astor and some of the DuPonts have been. It is perhaps fine that Zionism be labeled evil. Zionism includes both Christians and Jews. To be a Zionist is to identify oneself with a movement that the elite has set up and controlled for their purposes. Many in the Zionist movement are like common people everywhere. They want to do what is right. They have simply not gotten the bigger picture, and are being used. When two groups have some similarities but each want to keep their own identity, they can be mortal rivals. One group that has been very easy for Satan to provoke against Christians is the Jews. Perhaps no group of people has hated Christians with more intensity. One of the first groups that Satan worked at controlling were the Jews. But to call the conspiracy Jewish is misleading. The father of it all is Satan. It is satanic, and it will use anyone it can. And God will use anyone too. How many of us have escaped helping one cause or another of the establishment, or in being in some organization that the establishment was using? Let each of us examine ourselves and get our own lives in order. There is a song about violin that was going to auctioned off cheap until a master violinist picked it up and played a good tune on it. Don't auction people off cheaply. The touch of the master's hand can turn anyone into a beautiful thing. Don't reject anyone who will let the master's hand tune his life. This is a war against evil, not race. Not every one of the most evil bloodlines is on the enemy's side. Many are trying to serve the Lord. Likewise, just because the Freeman family is one of the top 13 satanic families doesn't mean that all or even most Freemans are part of the hierarchy. Gaylord Freeman as Grand Master from 1918 to 1963, Jean Cocteau was Grand Master of the Préodicéen. Following the unification of the various powers into a secret NWO government in 1954, the Préodicéen had a major policy dispute. In 1963, with Cocteau's death, Gaylord Freeman, helped by Antonio Merzagora and Pierre Plantard de Saint Clair, governed the Préodicéen. In 1981, Pierre Plantard took over as Grand Master. In 1952, long before becoming Grand Master, Plantard de Saint Clair transferred 100 million francs worth of gold agates to Switzerland to the Union des Banques Suisses. When this was publicly revealed, he said that it was a legitimate move made for the French government. In 1955, several men associated with the Préodicéen obtained some old parchments, two of which gave the Merovingian genealogies. and they used the British notary of royal appointment Patrick Francis Jordan Freeman, that's one name, in relation to a request to the French government to take the old documents to London, England, where they were kept at 39 Great Russell Street. Later P. F. J. Freeman was used again the next year to request that the documents be allowed to stay in England to be held in a safe deposit box at Lloyds Bank of Europe in London. One of the men involved went by the name Captain Ronald Stansmore Nutting of London, born in Dublin, IR, who is reported by reliable sources to have been in British intelligence MI5, and had sat on the board of directors of at least 14 companies, including Arthur Guinness and Guardian Assurance. He was chairman of the board of the British and Irish Steam Packet Company. He was also governor of the Bank of Ireland. One of Guardian Assurance's departmental chairmen was also in MIS operative besides Captain Nutting. Another P.D.S. member who was with Nutting was Viscount Frederick Leathers, who was British Minister of War Transport during WWII. Viscount Leathers had a business associate and longtime friend Sir William Stevenson, who was the wartime chief for MI6's American branch office called BSC, British Security Coordination, in New York. Another friend of Leathers was Conop Guthrie, also headed BSC for MI6 in New York. Guthrie was a shipping executive. Due to internal trouble in the Prieurducyon that resulted from a rule that members had to place a birth certificate and signature with the priory, an English faction created forgeries of birth certificates and signatures and in secret protests sent these as originals to France. P.J. Freeman then got involved in this act of defiance. Another division occurred between the French members and the American members. The French wanted more of a role and some type of restoration of the monarchy in a united Europe. The AMA. British members who far outnumbered the few French wanted to skip the monarchy idea. The Vatican and the Prieurducyon P.D.S. my personal abbreviation, work together. Apparently, the Vatican is given some type of minor kickback for their cooperation. John Drick, A. Robert Aboud, and Gaylord Freeman were three members of the Prieurducyon that were associated with the First National Bank of Chicago. John Drick had started as an assistant cashier in 1944 and became a vice president 3 years later. In 1969, Drick became both the president and one of the directors of the bank. He also was on the board of a number of other companies including Stephan Chemical, MCA Incorporated, Oak Industries, and Central Illinois Public Service. The Guardian Royal Exchange Assurance, the Guardian Assurance, in London where P.J. Freeman worked had shared a building with the First National Bank of Chicago, which had Gaylord Freeman as chairman of the board of directors. In other words, the two businesses and the two Freemans all connected, it seems, to the Prieurducyon, and then by other inferences all connected back to the hierarchy. Gaylord Freeman's signature appeared on a Prieurducyon document of Dec. 16, 1983. Gaylord Freeman never publicly admitted that he even knew anything about the P.D.S. Grand Master Gaylord Freeman and Roger Freeman instructed the U.S. government. On the next page is a photocopy of the article that the New York Times ran when Gaylord Freeman died. It has often been said if you want to know who really runs things, look at a man's advisors. Now check this out, Gaylord Freeman never ran for any major political office and the voting process is supposedly to get men who know what they are doing into OMCE, and yet if you read the N.Y. Times biography you will read, Mr. Freeman was frequently called on by Washington for advice and assistance. Yes, presidents and congressmen called Gaylord Freeman for advice, instructions might be a better term, and yet most of us haven't even heard of the man. Again, for those who think that only the Rockefellers and Rothschilds are powerful families, let me ask, why weren't they calling Rockefeller? Not only did the presidents turn to Gaylord Freeman for advice, orders, they also turned to another member of the family, Roger A. Freeman. Roger A. Freeman was a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute. I suspect Roger was Jewish, but the newspaper doesn't say any religion. The New York Times biographical news article that came out when Roger died is also put on the next page. Note that in the headline they emphasize that Roger Freeman played the role as advisor to 2 presidents. And yet I doubt that hardly any American has heard of him. One prominent Freeman, James D. Freeman, has played a leadership role in Unity School. James Freeman has written at least 6 important books for Unity which they have published. 2 of his works are Unity School and The Story of Unity. Had the article on spiritual warfare covered ritual sites in Kansas, Missouri, I would have mentioned about the Unity School. Near, adjoining, the Unity School, in between Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, is a strip of wooded land. Little Ricky Road goes through this area, and the forest along Little Ricky Road has been used for satanic rituals by a coven that was made up of adults, not teenagers. Interestingly, a man who was part of the Unity School hierarchy and came to Christ told me that the school secretly conducted Luciferian initiations and that Robert Schuller, 33 degrees Mason, and leading Protestant clergymen knew all about Luciferian initiations being conducted there, yet Schuller went ahead and taught his principles of church growth to Unity School. They call the school Unity School of Christianity, but a more accurate name would be Unity School of Witchcraft. Many witches have in fact been associated with the Unity Church and are closely working with it to secretly destroy Christianity. I know from inside information that the hierarchy is sending orders to the school, so it would not surprise me if James D. Freeman was actually part of the Freeman family, that is one of the top 13 Illuminati families. Some of the family are clearly Jewish, such as Ernest Robert Freeman, who lives in Maryland and is an important Jewish leader. He has been the DLR of the Jewish Community Council in his area, and president of the Sachs-Freeman Association. The Sachs family also ties into the conspiracy, said that is interesting. And Grace Freeman, who is Jewish, wrote inside the synagogue. Some of the Freemans are leaders in Christendom too. Lee Jackson Freeman is an American Baptist minister. He went to Union Theological Seminary, which is a totally ungodly place. They turn out socialists for graduates, etc. Lee Jackson Freeman was a member of the executive board of the National Ministries of the American Baptist Church. He also served in the ecumenical ministries in his Scranton, Pennsylvania area. Lexi Freeman is a Nashville, Tennessee Methodist pastor, Waverly Place, who is a Freemason. Origins of the family: there are obviously different unrelated family lines that have the last name Freeman. In the preliminary genealogical work that I have done, I have found Freemans coming from England, France, Germany and Austria. Howard L. Freeman is a Christian author, who has written about how the economic system of our nation is ungodly. I wrote to him a letter of inquiry about the Freeman family. He wrote me and told me that his family came from the English town of Barnstable, and that the Freemans in that area treated him as a royal guest when he visited the area. He was shown around England over a 50-mile radius by the Freemans in England. His opinion was that his last name did not originate in Barnstable, England. The history books record an M.P. Member of Parliament back in the times when our revolution was being plotted who was named Sambrook Freeman, c. 1721–82. He was from Fawley Court, near Henley, in Berkshire. He went to Oxford. I do not know if the Freemans in Maria, the Illuminati, are from England originally, but from the little clues I have that would be my first guess. If not England, then likely France. Mary Freeman of Marlborough, Wiltshire, England claimed back in 1988 that on July 13, 88, almost at midnight, that she, Mary Freeman, was leaving the ancient Druid stone circle at Avebury when she saw a UFO over Silbury Hill. Most people are interested in her UFO report. I'm curious why this Freeman lady was out late at night at some ancient Druid site. Illuminati and Satanism. Due to time restraints, I haven't progressed as far in my research as I would like. However, I have been able to identify one Freeman in the Illuminati. He was Minnesota's Gov. Orville Freeman, who appointed Walter Mondale to the position of Attorney General when Walter was just 32 years old. Walter Mondale later enjoyed the status of being the only U.S. Senator on the Trilateral Commission. Walter Mondale went on to survey the Illuminati as U.S. Vice President, and Orville Freeman was appointed as a cabinet member for Kennedy's and then Johnson's administration. Another Freeman is listed on secret membership lists as joining the Order of Skull and Bones in 1869. See his picture, which is reproduced. Don Freeman wrote books on witches, including Space Witch and Tilly Witch. Another Freeman was instrumental in the O.T.O. being set up. For those who know about the O.T.O., I've mentioned it in the past, it is Hermetic magic and Satanism. Right here in Oregon, we have been watching some Freemans because it appears that there are some Satanic Coven members here in Oregon who are Freemans. Freeman family writes books. It is interesting to look at some of the titles that various Freemans have authored. Here is a sampling. See if some of these don't sound like the authors could be potential candidates for being in a coven. Martin Freeman, Forecasting Astrology, plus several other astrology books. Richard B. Freeman, The Overeducated American. 7 Michael Freeman, Cohabitation Without Marriage. Lucy Freeman, Listening to the Inner Self. Kathleen Freeman, Books on the Greeks' Philosophy. A. V. Freeman, International Responsibility of States for Denial of Justice. Harold Freeman, Toward Socialism in America. Joe Freeman, Books Promoting Women's Liberation, such as Politics of Women's Liberation and Women, A Feminist Perspective. David F. Freeman wrote a handbook on private foundations. That's interesting because if anyone is skilled in creating foundations, especially private ones, it's the Illuminati. The Freeman family includes many lawyers, doctors, and psychiatrists. Some of the Freeman scientists are studying areas that are interesting. A. J. Freeman wrote on his area of expertise, magnetoelectric interaction phenomena in crystals. Sounds like a subject people interacting with the UFOs might study. Ties to other important families. Part of what I can do for the reader is to begin to give him or her a feel for how the Freeman family connects into the rest of things. This next section's information will include information that only tangentially relates to the Freemans, but is important to place them in the context of what is happening backstage, out of the sight of the world's eyes. The Freemans in the Satanic hierarchy in the U.S. work with the Illuminati families of the Collins and Wheeler families. Readers are already familiar with the Collins family, but not the Wheelers. Now let me explain who the Wheelers are, because I am trying to put some pieces of the puzzle in place for you. Gen. Earl Wheeler and his brother Leo Wheeler, a Grande Master of the Illuminati. See the top diagram. PG. 14 the 1st of January 93 newsletter, are secret Satanists and also 33 degrees Freemasons. Leo Wheeler, by virtue of his Grande Master status in the Satanic hierarchy, has been able to visit the WWIII underground facility. The route he used was to fly in, and then the last stretch is done in a black limousine. Various people in the WWIII area have occasionally spotted these VIP black limousines. The Wheeler family has a long history of involvement with Satanism, and its genealogical history goes back to the House of David. An amazing clue, or an amazing coincidence, appears when we look at the genealogy of the Mormon leaders. The Be Wise as Serpents book makes the connections of the Mormon leadership, but it doesn't appear that many have read or understood the significance. Maybe this here will help. The top Mormon leadership, LDS and ROLDS, all are related and descendants of the Merovingians, but for sake of discussion let us take Brigham Young. Brigham Young's first name was Brigham. It was given to him because of the importance of the Brigham family. His grandmother was Sybil Brigham. Sibyls were prophetesses of the ancient world, and the name is a semi-common occult name. Brigham Young and his family practiced magic. They were also intimately aware of their genealogy, which goes back to the Merovingian dynasty. One wonders if it is coincidence that the Merovingians' primary symbol, the bee, is also the symbol for the Mormon Church in Utah. Look at a Deseret Industries, Mormon thrift stores, building in your area and you will see the bee on their side. But not only does Brigham Young have Merovingian blood from at least 2 lines of blood, and possibly as many as 6 lines of blood back, but he also is related to the Collins family of Massachusetts that we wrote about in the 2nd of January 93 newsletter. Further, Brigham Young is also a blood relative of the Wheelers. This is the clue, which is amazing. A chart of all this is given on the next page. If Young's Wheeler relatives are related to the satanic Illuminati Wheelers, then we have an example of how 3 strains of top satanic blood have interwoven and resulted in the birth of the Freemason, witch, and president of the LDS, Brigham Young. Perhaps the tie-in doesn't exist, but it certainly is worthy of our examination. There may be some disinformation put out on this by the other side after this comes out, so don't be taken in by their establishment. As I have mentioned before, a descendant of Joseph Smith Jr., who was satanic ritually abuse victim, has quietly told certain people that her family is indeed a satanic bloodline. Further, I have mentioned other confidential pieces of information about how the leaders of the Salt Lake City Mormon Church, LDS, are working with the various parts of the Illuminati's empire, INCL. The Jehovah's Witnesses. Although the public split occurred between Mormonism and Masonry before the Mormons went to Utah, that was only for public consumption. The leadership have coordinated activities. The Mormon religion is really a high rite of Freemasonry, and this explains why when the Mormons went to Utah, the Mormons held Masonic schools. Hosea Stout mentions these Mormon Masonic schools in On the Mormon Frontier, The Diary of Hosea Stout, ed. by Juanita Brooks, 2 vols. Salt Lake City, Univ. of Utah Press, 1964, 2-415, 423. After going to Utah, Brigham Young contacted the chiefs of Freemasonry in England and proposed that Mormonism be granted a public charter to become its own Masonic rite. The hierarchy told him no. After that, Brigham Young began to publicly distance Mormonism from Masonry, and the Masons strangely broke many of their own rules to distance themselves publicly from Mormonism. LDS Apostle Reed Smoot was given permission to run for office by the LDS Church. Pray. Harding appointed him to the World War Foreign Debt Commission, and he also serried the elite as the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. The War Finance Corp. just happened due to Smoot's arranging it to give the LDS Church a $10 million loan. Mariner S. Eccles, of an old elite family, and a Mormon, and an Illuminatus, became Sec. of the Treasury in 1934, and was chairman of the Federal Reserve Board from 34 to 51. Ezra Taft Benson, later the LDS president, was appointed Sec. of Agriculture. David B. Haight, a prominent Mormon, was made the head of all the mayors in the San Francisco area. The full title is Governor of the San Francisco Bay Area Council of Mayors. Mormon Charles C. Cox was put in charge of the Securities and Exchanges Commissioner. I could go on listing some other Mormons who have been placed in key establishment positions. Why? Why are the Illuminati and their establishment not afraid of these Mormons who have leadership positions in the LDS Church? This is a whole area I would love to explain, but as this article is digressing from the Freemans, I need to return to subject being considered. The Lords of Anjou, part of the P.D.S., were plant agents, and so was one of Brigham Young's ancestors. If we go back through the Goddard and Gifford family ancestors, I am trying to get my readers to look behind the curtain of organizations that we publicly, and to see what is going on backstage. And then I am trying to show how the people backstage are related and know it. Summary: we find the Freeman family popping up as TB Grand Master of the Pre-Odyssean, as a co-rounder of the O.T.O., as a member of the Skull and Bones, as a powerful ADOL member, as members of satanic covens, and as authors of occult books, as well as other suspicious things. It also should be mentioned that two of the Freemans have been very important advisors to the U.S. presidents and many other high political leaders. The Freeman family has all the earmarks of being one of the top 13 Illuminati families, as my confidential sources reveal. More on the Freemans in 1991. Pulitzer Prize winner James B. Stewart, the front-page editor of the Wall Street Journal, came out with his book Den of Thieves. The book is the detailed story of how major insiders on Wall Street were systematic crooks. The four biggest names of the insider trading ring were Michael Milken, Ivan Boesky, Martin Siegel, and Dennis Levine. Robert Freeman worked with the ring, and ended up pleading guilty after the evidence cornered him. I am always suspicious of exposures of the establishment done by the establishment system. Often, the big crooks get away and the MIDI management take the blame. Take for instance, Iran-Contra. But Stewart's book Den of Thieves may be helpful in our understanding the Freeman family better. The Freeman family is one of the top 13 Illuminati families. At this time, there is nothing to tie Robert Freeman to Satanism, and that is not the purpose here. In an investigation, all the possible clues are collected. I am bringing my readership into this investigation of the top 13 families, and here is a possible suspect to make note of. Robert Freeman worked for the Jewish investment firm of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs headquarters on Broad Street in NY. Just a short distance from Goldman Sachs' trading floor in their headquarters building on the glass-enclosed 29th floor was Robert Freeman's office. Robert Freeman was a graduate of Dartmouth. He liked to vacation in Colorado skiing with his family. He worked with Siegel and Boesky, especially in his illegal insider deals. These insiders made millions off investors and would have made billions if they hadn't been arrested. Freeman and Siegel made some complicated deals such as the Unocal and the Storer affairs. Boesky went to Russia after prison and offered his financial talents but was politely rebuffed. One of the men involved with the ring was Milken. Milken's influence had been a major factor behind the stock market recovery after Black Monday, 1987. That was Monday, October 19, and the stock market plunged over 500 PTS. That day, Milken convinced investors to invest in the stock market, and the Federal Reserve flooded the market with cash to prevent a disaster. Milken was, and maybe still is, a close friend of Mason Jesse Jackson. Milken is heralded by many prominent Jews even after his arrest as a great Jew. That's not my opinion, a newspaper article will back that up. The Drexel firm associated with Milken was advised by the Federal Reserve, the SEC, the Treasury, and the Stock Exchange to declare bankruptcy with Chapter 11, which they did. Goldman and Sachs, both Jews, went to bat for Freeman, and hired private detectives to help his case. K. Scholar in NY represented Freeman legally. Eventually Robert Freeman pleaded guilty and was given a 4-month sentence which he served and was released on August 30, 1990. The significant part is that Robert Freeman was someone who was one of the major players in the New York Stock Exchange. Robert Freeman is not to be confused with Ernest Robert Freeman, who also is connected to the Sachs family, and was mentioned in the original article on the Freeman family, Ma. 15, 1993.